Hi, I'm Jackson Crawford. I'm an Old Norse specialist, previously teaching at several universities, and now presenting online for anyone interested in Norse language, myth, runes, etc. Today I want to talk about a little mystery that survives from our preserved sources of Norse myth, the poetic and prose Eddas, which is the brothers of the god Odin and the god Loki. Now let me get one thing out of the way, which is that Thor and Loki are not brothers in the original medieval myths. That is a figment of Marvel. So if you're coming at this from a perspective that begins with, say, the Marvel Comics or the Marvel Avengers movies, you might be misinformed about the relationship between Thor and Loki. Rather, we are told by Snorri Sturluson in his prose Edda, and please, if you haven't before, do check out my video about the difference between the prose and poetic Eddas, because it's actually somewhat important to this and several other topics. But Snorri Sturluson in his prose Edda says in two different places. Once in Gylfaginning he says, "Så nevnder Loki eta Lofter, sonur Þorbauti Jotens. Móðir hans heitir Laufey eða Nóll. Bröður hans Byleistur og Helblindi." One is named Loki, or Lofter, another name of Loki that I've discussed in its own video. Son of Þorbauti, a Jotun, or giant so-called, or anti-god. His mother is named Laufey, or Nóll. His brothers are Byleistur and Helblindi. And then again he mentions these same brothers in Skóldskaparmál, a different part of the prose Edda, where he says, "Hvernig skal kenna Loka, svo at kalla hann son Þorbauta og Laufeyjar, Nólar, bróður Byleists og Helblinda." How shall one name Loki? By calling him the son of Þorbauti and Laufey, or Nóll, and the brother of Byleistur, or Helblindi. Alright, so Snorri is pretty convinced that Loki has two brothers named Byleistur and Helblindi, and indeed, in the poetic Edda, which is a more archaic, more raw source, if you will, we do find Loki called the brother of Byleistur. So these are probably pretty old names, but we don't know a darn thing about Byleistur or about Helblindi. Byleistur is just a complete mystery. His name is a mystery. Actually, if you took that form of the name Byleistur just literally right off the surface, you would think it meant Beefoot, as in bee, the bug, foot. And I don't know what that means, right? You could maybe stretch it out to say that it means something like a really thin foot, like maybe the foot that a bird has or something like that. But I think that's probably trying too hard. And the name is not consistently preserved as Byleistur. It is sometimes Byleiftur. For example, in the Codex Regius of the Poetic Edda, in Völuspá, when Loki is called Byleif's brother, it's actually Byleif's brother. And that would look like it means like bee dolphin or something. So since this Byleistur or Byleiftur is never mentioned anywhere, remember, so often the names that are mentioned in Norse mythology are just names, and we don't get other stories about them, right? We don't have an extended edition of the Poetic Edda. We don't have, a director's cut or something. We just have no idea who this is. With Helblindi, there's a little bit more of a tantalizing possibility that he could be Odin. Now, Odin has his own brothers named. These are Vili and Ve, and that's a pretty consistent identification too. We see their names in the Poetic Edda and the poem Lokasenna, and then in his prose Edda, Snorri says, "Buri gat son than bor het, han fekk þeirrar konu bestla het, dóttir Bolthorns Jotuns, og fengu þá þrjú sonu. Het ein Odin, annar Vili, þriði Ve." So Buri had a son named Bor, He married a woman named Besla, the daughter of Bolthorn, a Jotun, or giant, or anti-god. And they had 3 sons. One was named Odin, another Vili, and the third Ve. Now, we really don't know much about Vili and Ve either, or not very much. Lokasenna hints that there was a time when Odin's wife Frigg slept with them. Snorri elaborates that a little bit in his Ynglinga saga, Saga of the Ynglings, which in many ways is a somewhat less trustworthy sort of rough draft of the Prose Edda. And then something like that is alluded to in Saxo Grammaticus's History of the Danes. But those are pretty ambiguous figures too. And so since Loki has 2 ambiguous brothers, and Odin has 2 ambiguous brothers, and the 2 of them are sworn brothers, people have wondered if, in fact, one of the brothers of Loki is another name of Odin, and one of the brothers of Odin is another name of Loki. That's not such a crazy idea, given that most of the gods, and especially Odin and Loki and Thor, have multiple different names that they're known by in the different poems. Because, for example, you might want to alliterate with an H when you're talking about Thor. So you don't call him Thor, you call him Hloridi, or something like that. Loki has, of course, the very prominent other name Lofter, which again I've discussed in its whole own other video. And Odin has about 80 other names that he talks about in Grimnismal. So it's not crazy to think that, say, Vili could be Loki or Helblindi could be Odin, especially since Odin claims the name Helblindi when he mentions his names in Grimnismal. Or does he? I'll come right back to this question after giving you a quick word from my sponsor. Okay, so why do I make it a question mark about whether Odin's name is Helblindi or not? It is a little bit of a question mark because we have different attestations to the same stanza of the poem Grimnismal, in which Odin names his various names. In stanza 46, he, among many other names, calls himself either Helblindi, which Snorri says is one of Loki's brothers, or Herblindi. Here's the problem. Remember that the Prose Edda is written by Snorri Sturluson, who knows the poems of the Poetic Edda. So it's not an independent source for anything that Snorri quotes in the Poetic Edda, unless there's differences between the poems in the Poetic Edda, or a given poem in the Poetic Edda between manuscripts, and there are such differences in Grimnismal. Most of the poems of the Poetic Edda are preserved in just one manuscript, the Codex Regius, or Koningsbók. Hávamál, for example, is preserved only in that one manuscript. But Grimnismal, together with Horbar's Ljóð, Forskirnis, and Baldur's Draumar, which doesn't appear in the Codex Regius, is preserved in the manuscript AM 748-1 Quarto. Okay, so when Snorri quotes stanza 46 of Grimnismal, he has Odin call himself Helblindi, at least in manuscripts R and W of the Prose Edda, which I consider the most valuable attestations of the Prose Edda. And in the Codex Regius manuscript, when Odin names himself in that stanza, he calls himself Helblindi too. But in AM 748-1 Quarto, which is a later manuscript from the early 1300s, he calls himself Herblindi. Most scholars today think that his name is actually Herblindi, and that only the scribe of AM 748-1 Quarto got that right, and that the other ones are all influenced by the name of Loki's brother and call him Helblindi for that reason. I actually don't think that's a great argument, because the Codex Regius typically, in other cases, has better readings than the AM 748-1 Quarto. But if Odin's name is Helblindi, that doesn't necessarily mean he's the same Helblindi as Loki's brother. Let me explain what I mean. For one thing, when someone is a foster brother or sworn brother of someone else, they are not called just brother in the sagas. So, for example, in the saga of Gisli Sorson, we have a very famous scene in which four men go together under an earthen arch and blend their blood, or they're supposed to. They end up abandoning the ceremony halfway through and becoming what is called in Old Norse a svara-brother, a sworn brother. Sometimes it's also referred to as foster brother. But although these relationships are very important in the sagas of Icelandic heroes, men in such a relationship don't refer to other men in that relationship as just brother, right? If you call someone brother, simply brother, that means he's literally your brother. You still use the special term svara-brother for someone that's sworn into that relationship. And I would think that Snorri would be sensitive enough to the nuances of his own culture to say that Odin and Loki were literally brothers, if that were the case. Snorri's also really, really excited sometimes about telling us all the different names of all the different figures. It seems strange that he wouldn't stop and point out, that, by the way, that name that I'm saying is Helblindi. That is Odin too, right? That Odin is Loki's brother, especially when it's actually not very far apart in Gylfaginning when he talks about how Loki's brothers are Helblindi and Bileistur, and Odin's brothers are Vili and Ve. It just seems really strange that somewhere in there he wouldn't mention, like, oh yeah, and they're this this is the same set of three people I'm talking about under three different names. Now, maybe the most plausible argument would be that perhaps Odin and Loki share a dad. It wouldn't be that insane for Bor and Forbauti to be the same individual, especially given that both Bor and Forbauti are really, really obscure. And Loki is so strongly identified with who his mom is, right? We very often see him called Loki Laufey Arsonar, and Laufey is his mom, again, contrary to the Marvel Universe, but that's the name of his dad. And then Odin is also sometimes called Beslasonar, or Besla comes up and names for him, or mentioning his uncles, his unknown uncle in Hávamál, for example. So, I could maybe accept that you could speculatively say that perhaps Bor and Forbauti are the same, so they're half-brothers or something. Why doesn't Snorri say that? Why doesn't Snorri mention that Loki is Thor's uncle in the several stories he relates in which those two are together? It just seems really strange that if Snorri thought that they were brothers, he wouldn't have said it. Now, that doesn't mean that no one ever thought they were brothers. But I don't think that it was a common understanding of their relationship in late pre-Christian Iceland, which is the society that informs the only sources we really have, the Poetic and Prose Edda. Now, I'll point out one more thing, which is that name, Helblindi, has been interpreted to be a hint at Odin's identity as the one-eyed, because some have read it as potentially being half blind, from the root holv, half, and blind, blind. Now, this actually looks really, really tempting, but it doesn't work. First of all, in Old Norse, if you have a compound with hell, it is always hell or death. And there's a lot of these compounds. We've got Helfus, eager for death or hell. Helfor, journey to death or hell. Helgalder, death or hell magic. Helgengen, Ganda hell. Helgróðr, the hell greed, the immense hunger preceding death. Hell now, the torments of hell. Hell Ray, the ride to hell. Hell score, shoes for hell. Hell Sot, deathly illness. Hell Stavir, hell letters. Hell Strid, strife of hell. Hell Vegar, road to hell. Hell Viti, punishments in hell. Hell Van, likely to die. So Old Norse speakers would interpret any given other compound starting with hell as hell, not half. Now, there is the word helmingur, meaning a half, which is probably formed in late Proto-Norse from holv I lingas. So that's half, holv, and I lingas is a diminutive suffix. Compare buklinger, little book, gaslinger, little goose, muslinger, little mouse. Causes, as any Old Norse student could tell you from that, a mutation in the root. And so we have a very expected, although superficially unlikely looking sequence there, where we go halvilingas to hilvlinger, losing the I umlauting vowel and I mutating the root in halv, to probably something like Helblindi, with our classic Old Norse 3-consonant rule where we lose the second or most distinct consonant. And then maybe Helblindi by dissimilation. Now, by a similar process, half-blind could potentially go halvblind to hallblind, but there's nothing to I mutate that A into E. Now, I say that as someone who thinks it would be really cool to say that, Odin is Loki's brother. But I just don't see how it linguistically works. You need something to I mutate the A in halv into an E, and without it, you're just not going to get Helblindi, meaning half-blind, as sweet as that would be. I mean, it would be really cool if another name for Odin was hiding out there in the name of Loki's brother. Now, it's still mysterious that Loki's brother has the same name as Odin, and it's not impossible that there were people in different parts of Scandinavia at different times who believed Odin and Loki were brothers or referred to them as brothers. But I just don't think that you can use this Helblindi argument to say that in the culture of the people who passed down the Eddas to us, which, remember, are the only sources we have that really aren't just laden with speculation, I think it's just inappropriate to say that late Icelandic pre-Christian culture thought of Odin and Loki as brothers, though they were certainly Svarabröður, sworn brothers. All right, well, from beautiful Wyoming, let me wish you all the best.